Villanelle sits in a window seat in the south wing of the Louvre Art Gallery in Paris. She is wearing a black cashmere sweater, leather skirt, and low-heeled boots. Winter sunshine pours through the vaulted window, illuminating the white marble statue in front of her. Life-sized, and entitled Psyche Revived by Cupid's Kiss, it was carved by the Italian sculptor Antonio Canova in the final years of the 18th century. It's a beautiful thing. Psyche, awakening, reaches upwards to her winged lover, her arms framing her face. Cupid, meanwhile, tenderly supports her head and breast. Every gesture speaks of love. But to Villanelle, who has been watching the visitors come and go for an hour now, Canova's creation suggests darker possibilities. Is Cupid luring Psyche into a sense of false security so that he can rape her? Or is it Psyche that's sexually manipulating him, by pretending to be passive and feminine? Unaccountably, passers-by seem to take the sculpture at its romantic face value. A young couple imitate the pose, laughing. Villanelle watches closely, notes how the girl's gaze softens, how the flutter of her eyelashes slows, how her smile turns to a shy parting of the lips. Turning the sequence over in her mind like a phrase in a foreign language, Villanelle files it away for future use. Over the course of her 26-year lifespan she has acquired a vast repertoire of such expressions. Tenderness, sympathy, distress, guilt, shock, sadness. Villanelle has never actually experienced any such emotions, but she can simulate them all. Darling. There you are. Villanelle looks up. It's Anne-Laure Mercier. Late as usual, with wide apologetic grin. Villanelle smiles, the air kiss, and strolled towards the Café Malian on the gallery's first-floor landing. I've got a secret to tell you, Anne-Laure confides. And you mustn't tell a soul. Anne-Laure is the closest thing that Villanelle has to a friend. They met, rather absurdly, at the hairdresser. Anne-Laure is pretty, extroverted and more than a little lonely, having exchanged life at a busy public relations firm for marriage to a wealthy man 16 years her senior. Gilles Mercier is a senior functionary at the Treasury. He works inordinately long hours, and his greatest passions are his wine cellar and his small but important collection of 19th-century ormolu clocks. But Anne-Laure wants to have fun, a commodity sadly lacking in the life she shares with Gilles and his clocks. Right now, before they've even reached the curving stone staircase up to the restaurant, she's pouring out the details of her latest affair, with a 19-year-old Brazilian dancer at the Paradis Latin Cabaret. Just be careful, Villanelle warns her. You have a lot to lose. And most of your so-called friends would go straight to Gilles if they thought you were playing around. You're right, they would. Anne-Laure sighs, and links her arm through Villanelle's. You're so sweet, you know that? You never judge me, and you're always so concerned. Villanelle squeezes the other woman's arm. I care about you. I don't want to see you hurt. In truth, it suits Villanelle's purposes to spend time with Anne-Laure. She's well connected, with an insider's access to the finer things of life. Haute couture shows, tables at the best restaurants, membership of the best clubs. Besides which she's undemanding company, and two women together attract far less attention than a woman on her own. On the negative side, Anne-Laure is sexually reckless, and it can only be a matter of time before some indiscretion is brought to Gilles' attention. When that happens, Villanelle doesn't want to give the impression that she's complicit in his wife's infidelity. The last thing she needs is the hostile attention of a senior public servant. So how come you're not shorting the Nikkei share index or whatever it is that day traders do? Anne-Laure asks, when they are finally installed at a table. Villanelle smiles. Even supercapitalists need a day off. Besides, I wanted to hear about this new guy of yours. She looks around her at the shining silver and glassware, the flowers, the paintings, the golden wash of the lights. Outside, beyond the tall windows, the sky has faded to a snow-laden gray, and the carousel gardens are almost deserted. As they eat, and Anne-Laure talks about her new amour, Villanelle makes attentive noises. But her mind is elsewhere. Fine living and designer clothes are all very well, but it's months now since the Palermo operation, and she badly needs to feel her heart race with the prospect of action. More than that, she wants confirmation that she's valued, that the organization regards her as a prime asset. She can still see, half a world away, the grim sprawl of the Dobryanka Remand Center. Was it worth it? Constantine had asked her. Throwing her life away to avenge her father, himself a man who'd gone to the bad. Put like that, of course, it wasn't worth it. But given her time again, she knew that she'd act exactly as she'd acted that night. Her father had been a close-quarter battle instructor before he'd started freelancing for the Brothers Circle. And although Boris Vorontsov hadn't been the ideal parent, given to whoring and heavy drinking, and dumping Oksana in the orphanage whenever he went away on active service, he was her flesh and blood, and all she had after her mother's death. There hadn't been many birthday or New Year presents, but her father had taught her to defend herself, and more. There had been memorable days in the forest, wrestling in the snow, shooting at tin cans with his old Makarov service pistol, and lopping through birch trunks with his Spetsnaz issue machete. She'd hated the machete at first, finding it heavy and unwieldy, but he'd taught her how it was all in the timing. That if you got it right, the weight of the blade and the arc of the swing did the job for you. She'd found out easily enough who killed him. Everyone knew, that was the point. Boris had tried, clumsily, to defraud the brothers, and they'd shot him and left his body in the street. The following evening Oksana walked into the pony club on Ulitsa Pushkina. The three men she was looking for were standing near the bar, drinking and laughing, and when she sauntered up to them, smiling suggestively, they fell silent. In her army surplus jacket and supermarket jeans she didn't look much like a shliuka, a whore, but she was certainly acting like one. Oksana stood there for a moment in front of them, looking from face to face with taunting, amused eyes. Then she dropped into a crouch, her arms reaching back between her shoulder blades for the machete in its webbing holster, and drove upwards through her knees as her father had taught her. Half a kilo of titanium finished steel blurred the air, the chisel edge passing unchecked through the first man's throat before burying itself deep below the second man's ear. The third man's hand dived to his waistband, but too late. Oksana had already let go of the machete and drawn the Makarov. Around her, she was vaguely aware of panicked breathing, suppressed screams, people backing away. She shot him through the open mouth. The report was deafening in the enclosed space, and for a moment he just stood there staring at her, blood and brain matter spilling from a gaping white flap of bone at the back of his head. Then his legs went, and he hit the floor beside the first man, who was somehow still on his knees, a desperate, dregs of the milkshake rasp issuing from the bubbling gash beneath his chin. The third man wasn't finished yet, either. Instead, he was lying in a fetal position in the spreading red lake, his feet working feebly and his fingers plucking at the machete embedded in the angle of his jaw. Oksana watched them, annoyed at their failure to die. It was the kneeling man who really infuriated her, making that sick, strawberry McFlurry noise. So she knelt beside him, drenching her Cosmo jeans in blood. His gaze was failing, but the eyes still held a question. "I'm his daughter, you cunt," she whispered and, pressing the Makarov's barrel to the nape of his neck, squeezed the trigger. Again, the detonation was appallingly loud, and the man's brains went everywhere, but the sucking noise stopped. "Shiri." She blinks. The restaurant swims back into focus. "Sorry, I was miles away." "What did you say?" "Coffee?" Villanelle smiles at the waiter hovering patiently at her side. "Small espresso, thank you." "Honestly, sweetie, sometimes I wonder where you go in these daydreams of yours. Are you seeing someone you haven't told me about?" "No. Don't worry, you'd be the first to know." "I'd better be. You can be so mysterious at times. You should come out with me more often, and I don't mean shopping or fashion shows. I mean..." She draws a fingertip down the frosted stem of her champagne flute. "More fun stuff. We could go to La 00 or Lawn Canoe. Meet some new people." In her bag, Villanelle's phone buzzes. A single-word text message, "Connect. I have to go. Work." "Oh, please, Vivi, you're impossible. You haven't even had your coffee." "I'll do without. You're so boring." "I know. Sorry." 2 hours later Villanelle is sitting in the study of her rooftop apartment in the Porte de Passy. Beyond the plate glass window, the sky is cold steel. The email contains a few lines of text about skiing conditions in Val d'Isère, and half a dozen JPEG images of the resort are attached. Villanelle extracts the password and accesses the payload of compressed data embedded in the images. It is a face, shot from different angles. A face she memorizes like the text. The face of her new target. Thames House, the headquarters of the British Security Service MI5, is on Millbank, in Westminster. In the northernmost office on the third floor, Eve Pilastri is looking down at Lambeth Bridge and the wind-blurred surface of the river. It's 4 p.m. and she has just learned, with mixed feelings, that she is not pregnant. At the next terminal, her deputy Simon Mortimer replaces his teacup in its saucer. "Next week's list," he says. "Shall we run through it?" Eve takes off her reading glasses and rubs her eyes. Wise eyes, her husband Nico calls them, although she's only 29, and he's almost 10 years older. She and Simon have been working together for a little over 2 months. Their department, known as P3, is a subsection of the Joint Services Analysis Group, and its function is to assess the threat to high-risk individuals visiting the UK, and if necessary to liaise with the Metropolitan Police with a view to providing specialist protection. It's in many ways a thankless task, as the Met's resources are not infinite, and specialist protection is expensive. But the consequences of a poor judgment call are catastrophic. As her former head of section Bill Tregarin once said to her, before his career went into freefall, "If you think a live extremist preacher's a headache, wait until you have to deal with a dead one." "Tell me," Eve says to Simon. The Pakistani writer, Nasreen Jalani. She's speaking at the Oxford Union on Thursday week. She's had death threats. Plausible? Plausible enough. SO1 have agreed to put a team on her. Go on. Reza Mokri, the Iranian nuclear physicist. Again, full protection. Agreed. Then there's the Russian, Kedrin. I'm not so sure about him. What aren't you sure about? How seriously we should take him. I mean, we can't ask the Met to babysit every crackpot political theorist who shows up at Heathrow. Eve nods. With her makeup-free complexion and shoulder-length hair gathered in a scrappy updo, she looks like someone for whom there are more important things than being thought pretty. She might be an academic, or an assistant in the better sort of bookshop. But there's something about her, a stillness, a fixity of gaze, that tells another story. Her colleagues know Eve Pilastri as a hunter, a woman who will not readily let go. "So who requested protection for Kedrin?" she asks. "Eurasia UK, the group which organized his visit. I've run checks, and there, I know who they are. Then you'll know what I mean. They look more cranky than dangerous. All this stuff about the mystical bonds between Europe and Russia, and how they should unite against the corrupt, expansionist USA. I know. It's pretty wild, but they've got no shortage of supporters. Including in the Kremlin. And Viktor Kedrin's their poster boy. He's the ideologist. The face of the movement. Charismatic figure, apparently. But not at immediate risk in London, surely? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, who would he be at risk from? The Americans aren't crazy about him, obviously, but they're not going to call in a drone strike on High Holborn. Is that where he's going to be staying? Yes, at somewhere called the Vernon. Eve nods. I suppose you're right. We don't need to trouble Protection Command with Mr. Kedrin. But I think I might go to his talk. I assume he's addressing the Eurasia UK faithful at some point? The Conway Hall. Friday week. Good. Keep me posted. Simon inclines his head in assent. Although only in his 20s, he has the arch solemnity of a metropolitan vicar. Keying in her identification code, Eve calls up the HST, or High Security Threat List. Circulating among friendly intelligence services, including on-off allies like the Russian FSB and the Pakistani SID, this is a database of known international contract killers. Not local enforcers or fly-in fly-out shooters, but top-echelon assassins with political clients and price tags affordable only by the seriously wealthy. Some of the entries are lengthy and detailed, others are no more than a code name harvested in the course of surveillance or interrogation. For over 2 years now Eve has been building up her own file of unattributed killings of prominent figures. A case she constantly returns to is that of Dragan Horvat, a Balkan politician. Horvat was an exceptionally nasty piece of work, implicated in human trafficking and much else besides, but that didn't save Bill Tregarin when Horvat was murdered in central London on his watch. Relieved of his post, Bill was seconded to GCHQ, the government listening centre at Cheltenham, and Eve, previously his deputy, became head of section at P3. Horvat was killed on a trip to London with his girlfriend, a 17-year-old heroin addict from Tbilisi named Irma Birids. Officially, he was in London as a member of a high-ranking trade delegation. In truth, he and Irma spent most of their time shopping. They had just left a Japanese restaurant in a poorly lit side street in Bayswater when a hurrying figure bumped hard into Horvat, almost knocking him down. In a cheerful mood, well lubricated by sake, Horvat was initially unaware that he had been stabbed. Indeed, he apologized to the disappearing figure before becoming aware of the warm blood pumping from his groin. Open-mouthed with shock, he sunk to the pavement, one hand clamped uselessly to his severed femoral artery. It took him less than 2 minutes to die. Irma was still standing there, shivering and uncomprehending, when a party of Japanese businessmen left the restaurant a quarter of an hour later. Their English was imperfect, hers non-existent, and it was a further 10 minutes before anyone called the emergency services. Irma was profoundly traumatized, and initially insisted that she could remember nothing about the attack. But patient questioning by an officer from the Metropolitan Police's SO15 branch, assisted by a Georgian interpreter, eventually elicited a single key fact. Dragan Horvat's killer was a woman. Professional female assassins are very rare indeed, and since joining the service Eve has been aware of just two. For some years, according to the HST file, the FSB used a woman named Maria Golovkina to execute overseas hits. A member of Russia's small-bore pistol squad at the Athens Olympics, Golovkina is thought to have been trained in covert assassination at the Spetsnaz base in Krasnodar. There's also an entry in the file for a Serbian hitwoman, attached to the notorious Semun clan, named Yelena Markovic. Neither could have killed Horvat, for the simple reason that by the time the politician met his end in London both were dead. Golovkina had been found hanged in a hotel wardrobe in Brighton Beach more than a year earlier, and Markovic had predeceased her by 4 months, blown to shreds by a car bomb in Belgrade. So if Irma Birids was right, it meant that there was a new female assassin abroad. And this interests Eve very much indeed. Why, she isn't completely sure. Perhaps because she can't imagine taking a human life herself, she is fascinated by the notion of a woman for whom killing is unexceptional. Someone who could get up in the morning, make coffee, choose what to wear, and then go out and cold-bloodedly put a total stranger to death. Did you have to be some kind of anomalous, psychopathic freak to do that? Did you have to be born that way? Or could any woman, correctly programmed, be turned into a professional executioner? Since taking over P3 from Bill, Eve has conducted a discreet but exhaustive search of the live case files for any further suggestion of female involvement in an assassination, and has flagged 2 references. The first involves the shooting in Germany of Alexander Simonov, a Russian business oligarch suspected of funding Chechen and Dagestani militants as part of a deal relating to oil and gas concessions. The assassin, who fired a burst of 6 rounds from an FNP-90 submachine gun into Simonov's chest outside the Frankfurt headquarters of the Altinvest Bank, was wearing dispatch rider's waterproofs and a full-face motorcycle helmet, and raced away on a machine later identified as a BMW G650's Moto. Of the dozen or so onlookers questioned afterwards, 2 stated that they had the impression that the shooter was a woman. The other case, the close-up slaying in Sicily of a mafia boss named Salvatore Greco, is apparently non-political. Local innuendo attributes the slaying, directly or indirectly, to the dead man's nephew, Luca Messina, who has since assumed the leadership of the Greco clan. But there has also been speculation in the press about an accomplice, the so-called woman in the red dress. According to the investigators of the DIA, the Direzione Investigativa Antimafia, Greco was found dead in a private box at the Teatro Massimo in Palermo, following an opera performance. He had been shot in the heart at close range with 2 low-velocity .22 rounds. His 2 bodyguards were also found dead on the floor of the box, dispatched with single shots to the base of the skull. Luca Messina is known to have been at the theater that night, and a witness has described seeing him in the bar shortly before curtain up, talking to a striking dark-haired woman in a red dress. It appears that they were not sitting together, but CCTV footage shows Messina leaving the theater via the stage door shortly after the final curtain. A couple of paces behind him is a blurred figure, a woman in a red dress, dark hair swinging around her shoulders. Her face is invisible, masked by the opera program that she's holding up as if to fan herself. Which, Eve reflects, is certainly no accident. The woman is well aware that the CCTV camera is there. But the really strange detail is one that the DIA have not made public. Before Greco was killed, he was immobilized with a lethal tranquilizer apparently delivered via a custom-made device that was found buried in his left eye. A photograph of this device is in the online case file, along with details of its inner workings. It's a sinister-looking thing, a curved and hollowed steel spike containing an inner reservoir and armed with a tiny plunger. Why was it necessary to incapacitate Greco in this way before shooting him? It's a question that snagged Eve for some time, and she's no nearer to finding an answer than she was on the day that she first read the file. Given that the assassination took place in an essentially public location, wouldn't it have made sense to get it over with quickly? Why, with discovery possible at any moment, would the killer want to drag things out? Eve is still pondering this question when she arrives back at the flat in Finchley a few minutes before 8 o'clock. Her husband, Nico, is not there. He's gone ahead to the bridge club where he instructs 3 evenings a week. He's left a pierogi, a Polish dumpling dish, in the oven, which Eve retrieves gratefully. She's not much of a cook and hates having to prepare meals from scratch when she arrives back after a long day at Tem's house. As she eats, she watches the 8 o'clock news summary on the BBC. There's a warning of a cold front coming in from the east, make sure your boilers are serviced, an overwhelmingly bleak piece about the economy, and an imported clip of a rally in Moscow, where an impassioned, bearded figure is addressing an attentive crowd in a snow-whitened square. A blurry caption identifies him as. Eve leans forward in her seat, a forkful of pierogi suspended in her hand. Despite the poor image quality, Victor Ketteren's magnetism is palpable. She strains to hear his words behind the commentator's voiceover, but the clip cuts to a story of an orphaned kitten adopted by a chihuahua. When she's finished eating, Eve exchanges her work clothes for jeans, a sweater and a zip-up windproof jacket. The result is unsatisfactory, but she can't be bothered to give it more thought. She looks around the flat, from the waist-high stacks of books in the narrow front hall to the clothes hanging from the drying rack in the kitchen. If and when I get pregnant, she tells herself, we're going to need somewhere bigger. For a moment, she allows her thoughts to linger on the airy red brick mansions in Netherhall Gardens, just 5 minutes walk away. A first-floor apartment in one of those would be perfect. And about as likely to come into her and Nico's possession as Buckingham Palace. The combined salaries of a security services officer and a teacher just didn't stretch to that sort of place. If they wanted somewhere larger, they'd have to move further out. Barnet, perhaps. Or Totteridge. She rubs her eyes. Even the thought of moving is exhausting. She zips up her windproof. The club is 10 minutes away, and as she walks, she thinks of that cold front coming in from the east. It seems to promise not just ice and snow, but menace. It's a tournament night at the West Hampstead Bridge Club, and the place is filling fast. The game room is laid out with folding base-top tables and stackable plastic chairs. It's warm after the chill of the streets, and there's an animated buzz of conversation round the bar. Eve spots Nico Pilastri, her husband, straight away. He's playing a practice hand with 3 beginners, his gaze attentive, his movements economical. Even at a distance Eve can see from their body language how anxious the novices are to impress him. A woman with teased blonde hair leads a card, and Nico regards it for a moment before picking it up and returning it to her with a grave smile. She looks confused for a moment, then her hand flies to her mouth and everyone at the table laughs. Nico has the gift of imparting knowledge with grace and humor. In the North London school where he teaches maths he's popular with the pupils, who are generally acknowledged to be a tough bunch. At the club, where he is one of 4 senior instructors, the members compete openly for his approval, with even the flintiest veterans melting at a word of praise for a stylishly executed finesse, or a contract made against the odds. Eve met Nico 4 years ago, when she first joined the club. At the time she was less interested in improving her bridge playing than in finding a social life disconnected from the intense, inward-looking hive of Tem's house. A social life that would hopefully feature an attractive, intelligent man. In her mind's eye she saw a suave figure, his features not quite discernible, leading her up a broad flight of steps to a smart West End restaurant. The Bridge Club, whose members had an average age somewhere north of 50, did not deliver such a man. Had she wished to meet retired accountants and widowed dentists, it would have been just the place, but attractive single men under 40 were thin on the ground. Nico wasn't there when she first presented herself. She and a couple of other prospective members were attended to by Mrs. Shapiro, the blue-haired club secretary. Dispirited by the experience, she was in 2 minds about going back the next week. But she went, and this time Nico was there. A tall man with patient brown eyes and the mustache of a 19th-century cavalry officer, he took charge of Eve from the moment she arrived, squiring her to a table, summoning 2 more players, and partnering her without comment for half a dozen hands. Then, dismissing the others, he faced her over the green baize table. So, Eve. Good news, or not so good news? Not so good news first, I think. Okay. Well, you understand the basics of the game. You learnt as a child? My parents both played, yes. And you like, very much, to win. Eve meets his gaze. Is it that obvious? To others, maybe not. You like to play the Mishka, the mouse. But I see the fox. Is that good? It could be. But you have faults. A faulty fox? Exactly. If you're going to play a strategic game, you need to know very early on where all the cards are. To do this, you need to concentrate harder on your opponent's play. You need to remember the bidding, and count every suit. Right. She digested this for a moment. So what's the good news? The good news is that there's a very nice pub just 5 minutes away. She laughed. They were married later that year. Eve's bridge partner tonight is a young guy, perhaps 19, one of a trio of students from Imperial College who joined the club in the autumn. He's got a slightly mad scientist look about him, but he's a ferociously good player, and at the West Hampstead that's what counts. After her initial uncertainty, Eve has come to look forward to her evenings here. Some of the members are her parents' age and even, in one or two cases, her grandparents. But the standard of play is fierce, and after a rigorous day at Thames House she appreciates the idea of intellectual challenge for its own sake. At the end of the evening she thanks her partner. They've finished fourth overall, a good result, and he grins a little awkwardly and shuffles off. At the entrance Nico helps her into her zip-up waterproof jacket as if it was a Chanel coat, a tiny act of chivalry that does not go unnoticed by other female members, who glance at Eve enviously. "So how was your day?" she asks him, linking her arm tightly through his as they make their way back towards the flat. It's just started to snow, and she blinks as the flakes touch her face. The Year 11 boys would have a better understanding of differential calculus if they didn't all stay up until 2 in the morning playing Final Attrition 2. Or maybe not. "How about you?" She hesitates. "I've got a problem for you. I've been trying to figure it out all day." Nico knows what she does, and while he never presses her for information, Eve often thinks how useful a mind like his would be to her employers. At the same time, the thought of him walking the featureless corridors of Thames House fills her with horror. It's her world, but she wouldn't want it to be his. After leaving Krakow University with a master's degree in pure and applied mathematics, Nico took off round Europe in a battered van with a friend named Mosiek. Living and sleeping in the van, the pair traveled from tournament to tournament, bridge, chess, poker, anything offering a cash prize, and after 18 months on the road, retired with over 1 million zloty between them. Mosiek spent his share in less than a year, mostly on the girls at the Pasha Lounge on Warsaw's Ulica Mazowiecka. Nico headed for London. "Tell me," he says. "Okay." 3 dead men on the floor of a theater box, after a performance. 2 bodyguards and a mafia don. All shot. But the don has been tranquilized first. Paralyzed by an immobilizing agent injected into one eye. What's the story? Why was he not just shot like the bodyguards? Nico is silent for a minute. Who was killed first? I'm assuming the bodyguards. The shooter, thought to be the don's nephew, used a silencer. Low-caliber weapon at point-blank range. Body shots? The don, yes. The bodyguards, back of the neck. No mess. Very professional. And the syringe, or whatever. The immobilizing agent. What do we know about that? I'll show you. She takes a photocopy of a photograph from her bag. They stop for a moment in the whirl of snowflakes beneath a streetlight. Nasty-looking thing. He blows snow from his mustache. But clever. And perhaps it wasn't the nephew. Is there a woman involved? She stares at him. What makes you say that? The killer's first problem is how to get past the bodyguards with a weapon. These are going to be tough, experienced guys. Okay. But this, on the other hand. He holds up the photocopy. They're not going to give this a second look. How come? He reaches into his coat pocket, and takes out a pen. Look, if I draw a retaining wire which attaches here, and snaps into place there, what do we have? Eve stares at the limp photocopy. Oh, for fuck's sake. How can I have missed that? Her voice is a whisper now. It's a hair clip. A woman's fucking hair clip. Nico looks at her. So, is there a woman involved? In the business class lounge at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Villanelle checks her messages. A coded text confirms that Constantine will meet her at the La Spezia Cafe in Gray's Inn Road in London at 2 p.m. as arranged. Returning her phone to her bag, she sips her coffee. The lounge is warm, with smoothly molded seating in restful shades of white and taupe. The walls are flecked with illuminated leaf shapes. Beyond the plate glass exterior wall, the tarmac, slush and sky are a barely distinguishable gray. Villanelle is traveling on a false passport as Manon Lefebvre, the co-author of a French investment newsletter. Her cover story is that she is in London to talk to an online publisher interested in setting up a partnership. She looks professionally anonymous in a mid-length trench coat, narrow jeans and ankle boots. She's wearing no makeup, and despite the season, gray-lensed acetate sunglasses. Airports attract photographers and, increasingly, law enforcement professionals armed with facial recognition software. An Air France steward appears in the lounge and directs the business-class passengers to their flight. Villanelle has reserved the front aisle seat in the waiting Airbus, and although she makes a point of not meeting his eye, She can tell that the man in the window seat, currently flicking through an in-flight magazine, is determined to engage her in conversation. She ignores him, and taking out a 4G tablet and earphones, is soon immersed in a video clip. The clip shows, in slow motion, the contrasting terminal performances of two handgun rounds when fired into a block of clear ballistics gelatin, a testing medium designed to simulate human tissue. One round is Russian, one American. Both are jacketed hollow point, designed to deliver massive kinetic shock and remain within a target's body rather than passing through. Knowing that she's likely to be operating in a busy urban environment, this information is of interest to Villanelle. She's going to want a one-shot, lights-out kill. She can't risk the possibility of collateral damage. She frowns, torn between the two hollow point rounds. The Russian round expands on entry, its jacket peeling back like the petals of a flower as it blasts through flesh and bone. The U.S. round, by contrast, doesn't deform but tumbles nose over point, tearing a devastating wound cavity as it goes. Both have their very considerable merits. Could I ask you to switch off your device, mademoiselle? It's the stewardess, chic in her dark blue tailored suit. Of course. Villanelle smiles coolly, blanks the screen and takes out the earphones. Good movie? Asks her companion, seizing his chance. She noticed him earlier, in the business class lounge. Late 30s and implausibly good looking, like a designer-dressed matador. Actually, I was shopping. For yourself? No, for someone else. Someone special? Yes. It's going to be a surprise. Lucky him. He levels a dark brown gaze at her. You're Lucy Drake, aren't you? Excuse me? Lucy Drake? The model? Sorry, no. But. He reaches for the in-flight magazine, and pages through it until he reaches a fragrance advertisement. That's not you? Villanelle looks at the page. It's true, the model does look uncannily like her. But Lucy Drake's eyes are a piercing green. The fragrance is called Printemps. Spring. Villanelle takes off her sunglasses. Her own eyes are the frozen gray of the Russian midwinter. Forgive me, he says. I was mistaken. It's a compliment. She's lovely. She is. He holds out his hand. Louise Martine. Manon Lefebvre. She looks down at the magazine, now on the armrest between them. How did you know that model's name, if you don't mind me asking? I'm in the business. My wife and I own an agency, Tempest. We've got divisions in Paris, London, Milan, and Moscow. And this Lucy Drake is on your books? No, I think she's with Premiere. She's not working so much anymore. Really? She wants to act, apparently. And she thinks the more editorial and advertising she does, the less chance she has of being taken seriously. So does she have talent? She has talent as a model, which is very much rarer than you might think. As an actress. He shrugs. But then people so often undervalue their real talents, wouldn't you say? They dream of being something they can never be. You're Spanish? Asks Villanelle, deflecting the personal questions that she senses coming. Yes, but I spend very little time in Spain. Our main residences are in London and Paris. Do you know London? She considers. Did 6 weeks brutal unarmed combat training in the Essex marshes count? A fortnight spent hurtling round hairpin bends on the evasive driving course at Northwood? A week learning to pick locks with a retired burglar on the Isle of Dogs? A little, she says. The stewardess is back with champagne. Martine accepts. Villanelle asks for mineral water. You should think of modeling, he says. You have the cheekbones, and the fuck you stare. Thank you very much. It's a compliment, believe me. What do you do? Financial stuff. Much less glamorous, I'm afraid. So. Was your wife a model? Elvira? Yes, originally she was. A very successful one. But these days I deal with the clients, and she runs the back office. The conversation takes its predictable course. Villanelle is guarded on the subject of her alter ego Manon Lefebvre, and presses Martine for details about Tempest. With 2 glasses of Veuve Clicquot drunk and a third half empty, he's only too happy to talk about himself, while simultaneously plying Villanelle with a stream of increasingly flirtatious compliments. For a moment she wonders if he's a plant from MI5, or France's External Intelligence Service, the DGSE. But she didn't book the London flight, instead she took a taxi hailed at random outside the Galeries Lafayette on the Boulevard Haussmann, and paid cash for her ticket when she got to the airport. Basic counter-surveillance measures, including a last-second pull-off into a service station on the A1 autoroute, told her that she wasn't followed from Paris. And Martine was in the business class lounge before her, already checked in. Most importantly, her instincts, highly tuned when it's a question of her own survival, tell her that this man is not playing a role. That he really is the overgroomed seducer that he appears to be. The joke about narcissistic types like Martine is that they always think they're in control, at work, in conversation, during sex. Her thoughts drift to that night in Palermo. Say what you like about Leoluca Messina, he didn't have control issues. In fact, he was perfectly happy to let her fuck him while she was holding a cocked and loaded Ruger. In its way, the whole episode was quite romantic. Constantine is sitting in front of the cafe counter, facing the door in Gray's Inn Road. The Evening Standard is open in front of him at the sports page, and he's sipping a cappuccino. When Villanelle walks in, stamping snow from her boots, he looks up, his gaze vague, and nods her to a seat opposite him. The downbeat welcome robs the moment of its potential drama. No one looks up at the young woman in the thrift shop coat and knitted beanie. She orders a cup of tea, and the pair begin an inaudible conversation. Were anyone to attempt audio surveillance, they would find their efforts frustrated by the lo-fi snarl of the sound system and the steamy hiss and cough of the Gajah coffee machine. For 30 minutes, as customers come and go, they discuss logistics and weaponry in fast, idiomatic Russian. Constantine tests Villanelle's plan to destruction, throwing up objection after objection, but finally concedes its workability. He orders a second cappuccino, and stirs his cup meditatively. Palermo worried me, he tells her. What you did, driving through the city at midnight on the back of Messina's motorcycle, that was reckless. Things could have gone badly wrong. I improvised. I was in control throughout. Listen to me, and listen well. You are never completely safe. And you can never fully trust anyone. Not even you? Yes, Villanelle, you can trust me. But part of you should always be mistrustful, questioning and attuned to danger. Part of you shouldn't fully trust me. I want you to survive, okay? Not just because you're so good at what you do, but... He stops, annoyed that his concern for her has momentarily become personal. From the first, in that hut by the Chusovaya River, he has sensed the cross-currents of sex and death swirling beneath her icy surface. Known that the implacable hunger that drives her could also destroy her. For a moment, she looks almost vulnerable. Go on. His eyes rake the busy cafe. Look, right now, no one knows for sure that you even exist. But what happens this week could change everything. The British are a vengeful people. If you give them half a chance, their security services will come after you with everything they've got, and they will not back off. So it's important, this action? It's vital. Our employers don't take these decisions lightly, but this man must be eliminated. With a finger, she traces a V in spilt tea on the melamine surface of the table. I sometimes wonder who they are, these employers of ours. They're the people who decide how history is to be written. We are their soldiers, Oksana. Our job is to shape the future. Oksana is dead, she murmurs. And Villanelle must survive. She nods, and even in the winter dimness of the cafe he can see that her eyes are shining. Later, high above South Audley Street in Mayfair, she looks westwards. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling window the sky is umber in the twilight, and the trees are gray. Snowflakes drive silently against the plate glass. The top-floor apartment is registered in the name of a corporate finance group. There's a TV suite and a state-of-the-art sound system, which Villanelle will not use, and a fully provisioned kitchen, which she will leave only slightly depleted. For the next 48 hours she will spend much of her time here in the bedroom, sitting as now in a white leather Charles Eames chair, waiting. There are moments when she would welcome the sting of loneliness. Instead, she feels a level blankness, neither happy nor unhappy. She senses the rising of the tide, an echo of the action to come. Constantine will do his part, but in the end there will just be her, and Kedrin, and the moment. She touches a finger to her mouth, to the faint ridge of the scar. She was 6 when her father brought Khalif home. A hunting dog rejected by its previous owner, the animal attached itself devotedly to Oksana's mother, who was already gravely ill. Oksana wanted Khalif to love her, too, and one day she climbed onto the steel-framed bed in which her mother passed her increasingly pain-racked days and nights, and pressed her face close to the dog, which was curled up on the thin blanket. Baring sharp teeth in a vicious snarl, Khalif struck out at her. There was a lot of blood, and Oksana's torn lip, stitched without anesthetic by a medical student from a neighboring apartment, was slow to heal. Other children stared at her, and by the time the wound ceased to be noticeable Oksana's mother was dead, Her father was in Chechnya and Oksana herself had been consigned to the tender mercies of the Sakharov orphanage. Villanelle could easily have her upper lip remodeled by a plastic surgeon, so that it curves into the perfect bow that nature intended, but she hasn't done so. The scar is the last vestige of her former self, and she can't quite bring herself to erase it. From nowhere she feels a morbid crawl of desire rolling onto her side on the white leather. She presses her thighs together and clasps her arms across her small breasts. For several minutes she lies like this, her eyes closed. She recognizes it, this hunger. Knows that it will tighten its grip unless satisfied. She showers, dresses, and slicks back her hair. The lift conveys her soundlessly to the ground floor, and the street. She blinks as the first whirling snowflakes find her face. Cars pass with a faint hiss of tires, but there aren't many people on foot, except a prostitute in a full leopard skin coat and platform heels waiting on the corner of Tilney Street, patiently eyeing the forecourt of the Dorchester Hotel. Walking northwards, navigating on impulse, Villanelle turns from South Audley Street into Hill Street, then through an archway into a narrower road leading to a square so small it's almost a courtyard. One side is taken up by a brightly illuminated gallery window, beyond which a private view is taking place. There's a single spotlit object in the window, a stuffed weasel on a plinth, strewn with bright, multicolored cupcake sprinkles. Villanelle stares at it. The sprinkles look like multiplying bacilli. The installation, or sculpture or whatever it is, conveys nothing to her. Are you coming in? The woman, late 30s, black cocktail dress, wheat blonde hair pulled back in a chignon, is leaning out of the glass door of the gallery, holding it half closed to keep the cold air at bay. Shrugging, Villanelle enters the gallery, losing sight of the woman almost immediately. The place is packed with prosperous-looking invitees. A few are looking at the paintings on the walls, but most are facing inwards, conversing in tight groups as catering staff edge between them with canapes and bottles of cold Prosecco. Sweeping a glass from one of the trays, Villanelle positions herself in a corner. The paintings seem to have been reproduced from blown-up press photographs and blurry snatches of film. Anonymous, faintly sinister groupings, several with the faces blacked out. A man in a velvet-collared coat is standing in front of the nearest painting, a study of a woman in the back seat of a car, her shocked features lit by photo flash, her arm raised against the invading lenses of the paparazzi. Studying the man's expression, the faint frown of concentration, the unwavering gaze, Villanelle duplicates it. She wants to be invisible, or at least unapproachable, until she's finished her drink. So what do you think? It's the woman who invited her in. The man in the velvet-collared coat moves away. Who is she, in the painting? Villanelle asks. That's the point, we don't know. She could be a film star arriving at a premiere, or a convicted murderer arriving for sentencing. If she was a murderer she'd be handcuffed, and she'd arrive at the court in an armored van. The woman looks at Villanelle, takes in the chic Parisian crop and the Balenciaga biker jacket, and smiles. Are you speaking from experience? Villanelle shrugs. She's some burnt-out actress. And she's probably wearing no pants. There's a long moment's silence. When the woman speaks again, the register of her voice has subtly changed. What's your name? She asks. Manon. So, Manon. This event will take another 40 minutes, and then I'm closing the gallery. After that I think we should go and eat yellowtail sashimi at Nobu in Berkeley Street. What do you say? Okay, says Villanelle. Her name is Sarah, and she had her 38th birthday a month ago. She's talking about conceptual art, and Villanelle is nodding vaguely but not really listening. Not to the words, anyway. She likes the rise and fall of Sarah's voice, and she's touched, in an abstract sort of way, by the tiny age lines around her eyes, and by her seriousness. Sarah reminds her, just a little, of Anna Ivanovna Leonova, a teacher at Industrialny District Secondary School, and the only adult, except her father, to whom she's ever formed a real, unsimulated attachment. Is that good? Sarah asks. Villanelle nods and smiles, examining a pearlescent sliver of raw fish before crushing it, pensively, between her teeth. It's like eating the sea. Around them, soft lights touch surfaces of brushed aluminium, black lacquer and gold. There's a whisper of music, conversation rises and falls. Sarah's lips form words, and Sarah's eyes meet hers, but it's Anna Ivanovna's voice that Villanelle hears. For 2 years the teacher nurtured her charge's exceptional academic gifts, and showed endless patience for her graceless, barely socialized behavior. Then one day, Anna Ivanovna wasn't there. She'd been attacked and sexually assaulted while waiting for a late bus home from school. In hospital, the teacher was able to describe her assailant to the police, and they arrested an 18-year-old former pupil named Roman Nikonov, who had boasted of his intention to show the unmarried teacher what a real man felt like. But the police botched the forensics, and in the end Nikonov was released on a technicality. Manon. She feels Sarah's cool hand take hers. Where are you? Sorry. Miles away. You remind me of someone. Someone? A teacher at my school. I hope she was nice. She was. And she looked like you. Except that she didn't. She was really nothing like Sarah. Why had she thought that? Why had she said that? Where did you grow up, Manon? Street Cloud, outside Paris. With your parents? With my father. My mother died when I was 7. Oh my God. That's awful. Villanelle shrugs. It was a long time ago. So what did she? Cancer. She was just a couple of years younger than you. Cover stories are part of Villanelle's life now. Clothes she puts on, takes off, and hangs up for next time. I'm so sorry. Don't be. Withdrawing her hand from Sarah's, Villanelle opens the menu. Look at this. Wild strawberry sake jelly. We have to have some. She's always regretted that it was too dark to see Roman Nikonov's expression when she castrated him in the woods by the Mulyanka River. But she remembers the moment. The smell of the mud, and of the exhaust from his Riga moped. The pressure of his hand on her head, forcing her to her knees. The throttled screams, carrying far out over the water, as she pulled out the knife and hacked his balls off.
That's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you want to know more about us, find our profile links from the description below. If you have any suggestions, do send us a message. See you all in the next video. Take care.